The man in the window seat said it loud enough for 2 rows to hear. He said the bag was taking up space that did not belong to it, and that some people had no concept of the courtesy owed to others in a shared environment. And he looked directly at the woman sitting across the aisle when he said it. At the olive green duffel wedged beneath the seat in front of her, at her plain gray sweatshirt, at the $8 gas station coffee she was holding with both hands, the way a person holds something warm when they have been cold for a long time. The woman did not turn toward him. She set the coffee carefully on the tray table, reached down, and moved the bag 2 inches closer to her feet. That was the extent of her response. The bag was not in the aisle. It had never been in the aisle. Everyone within earshot understood this, and no one said so. A woman in a navy blazer found a great deal to study in her phone. A man in the row behind shifted his weight and looked out the oval window at the tarmac. A teenage boy in earbuds decided to be very interested in the seat pocket contents. The flight from Fort Hensley to Chicago Hartfield had 47 minutes left in the air, and the woman with the duffel had been in transit for 19 hours. The bag itself was not remarkable. Worn nylon, a faded stencil along the side that had been laundered enough times to lose its edges, a single sticker near the zipper that no one seated far enough away could read. She held her coffee again, and she looked at nothing in particular, and her left hand drifted to her right wrist, where a bracelet sat, thin and dull silver, and the pads of 2 fingers rested on it for a moment, the way you might rest 2 fingers on a pulse point without intending to take a pulse. In the 4th row from the back, a man in an aisle seat set down the laminated safety card he had been reading with the focused attention of someone who was not actually reading it. He was 61, in civilian clothes, a wool blazer the color of slate, a carry-on bag in the overhead that was smaller than it needed to be. He had looked at the sticker on the duffel when the woman boarded, from 8 rows away, in bad overhead light, and something in his posture had changed then. Not his expression, his posture. His shoulders had settled in a particular way, not the settling of comfort, but of a person arriving at a conclusion they had not expected to reach in this particular row, on this particular Tuesday. He did not look away from her now. The man in the window seat said something further, quieter, in the register of a person who considers himself to have made a reasonable point and is now merely reinforcing it. Someone's assumptions were about to cost them something. The man in the wool blazer already knew what. Before we go back to that Tuesday morning, if you have ever stood in a room and been looked through, rather than seen, drop still standing in the comments and hit subscribe. Because this story starts earlier than that flight, and much further from home. Aria Voss was 34 years old, and she had been awake for 19 hours before she ever boarded that plane. The first 7 of those hours had been spent at Monroe Army Medical Center in the post-operative recovery wing, not as a patient, at a bedside, a folding chair dragged 3 feet from the door, because the nearest family member the hospital had on file lived 1,200 miles away, and she was the closest thing to that. The patient was a man named Corporal Dennis Farr, 22, femur reconstruction, and when she left him at 6 in the morning, he was stable and asking for his phone. She had driven 40 minutes in a borrowed truck to the budget motel where her remaining belongings fit into 2 bags, one a suitcase with a broken wheel she had been meaning to replace for 8 months, and one the olive green duffel she had carried in some form for the last 11 years. She had showered, changed into the gray sweatshirt and the dark jeans, pulled her hair back with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing that particular thing without a mirror for long enough that mirrors become irrelevant, and she had sat on the edge of the bed for 4 minutes. Not thinking, as far as anyone watching could have determined. The window faced a parking lot and a service road, and, beyond that, the low, flat scrub that surrounds Fort Hensley like a qualifier. The bracelet was on her right wrist. It was always on her right wrist. She had not taken it off in 2 years and 7 months, and before that, when the clasp had broken, she had kept it in the breast pocket of her uniform, 3 inches from her sternum, for the 6 weeks it took to find someone who could fix it without losing the engraving. She stood up before the 4 minutes were finished. picked up the 2 bags, and walked out. The cab to Fort Hensley Regional Airport was $23. She sat in the back and did not check her phone. There are people who fill silences with sound because silence costs them something, and there are people who have learned to leave silence exactly where they found it. Aria was the second kind, the way that certain structures learn to carry their own weight without shifting it to the walls around them. The airport at Fort Hensley handles 412 passengers per day on a good day. It has 1 coffee vendor, a newsstand that closes at 2 in the afternoon, and a waiting area with 38 seats, 11 of which have a clear view of the single departure gate. She took a seat with her back to a pillar, duffel under the connected chair, broken-wheeled suitcase checked at the counter by a young woman named Paulette, who asked how her day was going, and received the honest reply that it was going fine, and a tip of $4 on a checked bag fee because Paulette was on her 4th hour of a 10-hour shift and looked like it. The flight boarded 20 minutes late. Aria was the 9th person down the jetway. She had the middle seat of a row of 3. The passenger in the window seat had introduced himself to the aisle seat occupant before the seatbelt demonstration was finished. He had the particular momentum of someone who has decided that a flight is a social event, and that this decision is binding on adjacent seating. His name, supplied without being requested, was Gordon Pell. He was wearing a quarter-zip fleece with a company logo embroidered at the chest, the name of a commercial real estate firm based, according to the logo, in the city of Crestview. He was 53, or close enough, and he had the specific confidence of a person who has been the most credentialed person in most rooms for long enough that the credential has become invisible to him, dissolved into simple rightness, the way salt dissolves into water, and afterward, the water no longer tastes of anything except itself. The aisle seat passenger had nodded twice and returned to his book. Gordon Pell had not fully registered this. He accepted the complimentary drink service with a specificity that required 3 clarifying exchanges with the flight attendant. He occupied his seat in the expansive way of a person who has not recently had a reason to make himself small. When the duffel had slid 3 inches under the wrong seat during turbulence, he had looked at it the way people look at things that belong in categories they have already assigned, and when the flight attendant did not immediately materialize to address his brief and efficient complaint, he addressed it himself, at the volume previously noted, in Aria's direction. She moved the bag 2 inches. She drank her coffee. She kept her eyes at a level, focused somewhere in the middle distance, neither at him nor at the floor. Her hands were steady, the kind of steadiness that is not the absence of tension, but the management of it, practiced until management becomes posture. The silver bracelet caught the cabin light once, when she shifted her elbow. Gordon Pell did not register the bracelet. He had already moved to surveying the meal choices listed on the back of the safety card. The sticker on the duffel read, in letters too small for anyone more than 18 inches away, to parse without effort, 8th Combat Support Hospital. Below it, smaller still, Mosul, Tikrit, Kandahar. The man in the wool blazer had read it from 8 rows back in bad light because he had spent 19 months in country developing the habit of reading small print at distances that should make small print illegible, and because that sticker was the same shape as a sticker he himself had carried on a bag for 7 years and still kept in a drawer at home, and when he read it, his shoulders had done the thing his shoulders did when he arrived at a conclusion. If you have ever been reduced to an inconvenience in a room where your history should have spoken for itself, drop still standing in the comments right now, because you need to understand who Aria Voss actually was before the rest of this Tuesday unfolds, and understanding it means going back further than Fort Hensley, back to a forward operating base in Kandahar province in the summer 11 years before that flight, and to the name she kept on a piece of silver she had never once explained to anyone who asked. She had been a combat medic attached to the 23rd Infantry, Forward Operating Base Kestrel, reaching the rank of Staff Sergeant, over 9 years of service that spanned 2 deployments to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan, 412 emergency interventions logged, and one night in August on which a mortar strike collapsed a transit shelter 40 meters from the aid station, and she had worked continuously for 11 hours on 12 casualties, the last of whom was a 23-year-old signals specialist named Marcus Renaud, who had kept asking her, between procedures, whether she was tired, and she had kept telling him she was fine. And he had told her that she had a very unconvincing fine, and she had told him that she would accept that feedback once he stopped bleeding, and he had said fair enough, and those were the last words they exchanged before his blood pressure dropped, in a way that the equipment she had in that tent on that night could not correct, and he died at 04:27, with her hands still working, and his pulse already gone. The bracelet had been his. She had found it on the floor of the aid station after the dust settled, the clasp broken from the fall, his name and blood type engraved on the inside face. The Army's property system did not account for it, and his next of kin, a sister in Portland, had told her when Arya called that Marcus had bought it himself, that it had not been a gift, and that she wanted Arya to keep it. The sister's name was Celestine. They had spoken 4 times on the phone in the years since, always briefly, always around August. Arya had left the Army 14 months ago, not with ceremony, with paperwork, a separation physical, and a shuttle to the nearest commercial airport. She had spent the 14 months since doing contract work for a veteran medical support nonprofit, which was how she had come to be at Fort Hensley, at Corporal Farr's bedside, on the morning of this particular Tuesday. She was going home to Chicago, where home meant a rented studio apartment she had occupied for 11 months, and whose furniture she had selected from a second-hand website with the kind of minimal deliberation that signals a person not yet fully persuaded that the arrangement is permanent. The broken-wheeled suitcase contained most of what mattered. The duffel contained medical supplies, 2 changes of clothes, and a laminated card she kept in the interior zip pocket, a card bearing Marcus Renaud's name, his blood type, and the date in August, which she had laminated herself, at a print shop on Fort Bragg, 3 weeks after she got home. The plane had begun its descent into Hartfield when the man in the wool blazer stood from his aisle seat and walked forward. This was not unusual. Passengers move about during descent for many reasons, but he stopped at Arya's row, and he did not pretend to be reaching for an overhead bin. He stood at the aisle edge of her row, and he said, quietly enough that Gordon Pell could not quite hear it from the window seat, that he had read the sticker on her bag when she boarded, and that he wanted to ask whether she had been posted to Kandahar during the summer, 11 years ago. His name was Darius Mercer. He had been a full colonel with the 44th Medical Brigade, and he had served one of those summers in the same province. He did not say this as an introduction. He said it as a coordinates check, the way you might read back a grid reference to confirm you are looking at the same map. Arya looked at him for a moment, the particular look of someone recalibrating distance, and she said, yes, Kandahar, 2013. He sat down in the empty seat 1 row ahead and turned slightly so that they could talk without raising their voices, and he told her what he had come to say, which was that he had known Marcus Renaud. Not well enough. That Marcus had been assigned to a signals rotation through his brigade for 3 weeks in June of that year, and that he had been, Darius said, a young man of the specific and particular quality of someone who makes a room want to be better than it was. He said he had learned what happened in August from the rotation officer. He had not known the name of the medic who had stayed. Arya's left hand found the bracelet. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said that Marcus had told her she had a very unconvincing fine. Darius said he believed that entirely. The window light in the cabin had shifted to the pale, flattened gray of late afternoon over a city, and neither of them said anything further for about 30 seconds, and that was the right amount of nothing to say. Then Darius asked if she was in Chicago for long, and she said she lived there now, or was trying to, and he said he was based at Hartfield-adjacent Brannock Reserve, consulting, and that he would like to buy her coffee if she would let him, not today, at her convenience. And he gave her a card that had his name and a phone number, and the seal of a reserve medical command and nothing else. She took it without looking at it, and put it in the duffel's outer pocket. Then he told her that what he had actually come forward to say, before any of that, was that he had heard what the man in the window seat had said about her bag, and that he was sorry no one in that cabin had said anything in return, and that he in particular was sorry because he had been 8 rows back and he had seen exactly what was on that sticker, and he had not said anything either, and that he thought she deserved better than that from anyone in this specific aircraft. Arya looked at the seat back in front of her. She said she appreciated it. She said she was used to carrying her own bag. The dissent tone sounded. Darius went back to his seat. Gordon Pell, who had heard approximately 30% of this exchange and understood perhaps 12% of it, had gone quiet in a way that was slightly different from his previous quiet. Chicago Hartfield International is the kind of airport that processes 68,000 people per day and makes each of them feel simultaneously essential to its function and wholly interchangeable with the person beside them. The jet bridge deposited them into a concourse that smelled of recycled air and chain restaurant coffee and the faint metallic edge of jet fuel that penetrates every layer of insulation in every terminal in every city and constitutes, for certain people, a particular version of coming home. Arya had her duffel over one shoulder, and she was walking at the pace of someone who knows where she is going and is not in a hurry to get there, which is the pace of a person who has learned to reserve urgency for situations that require it. She was 50 feet from the gate waiting area when it happened. A man 2 concourse gates down went down hard. Not a stumble. A full collapse. The specific quality of a person whose body has decided something without consulting them. Knees first, then sideways. His carry-on rolling free and spinning on one wheel in a half circle. His companion, a woman in her 40s, crouching immediately and making the sound people make when they do not know what to do, but need to do something. Arya was moving before the sound finished. The duffel was off her shoulder by the time she covered 20 feet, and she was unzipping the outer pocket by the time she reached 30. She went down to her knees on the hard airport floor beside him, without hesitating, without the half-second of evaluation that most people insert between seeing and acting. And she said clearly, and at a volume designed for the woman beside him, rather than for a crowd, that she needed everyone to step back 2 large steps. That she needed someone to tell the nearest gate agent right now. Not in a moment, now. That someone was down and needed airport medical, and she needed to know if he was on any blood thinners or cardiac medication. Looking at the companion when she asked this. The companion said she thought he took something for his heart. She said she needed the name or the bottle if there was one. The companion opened her handbag with shaking hands. Arya's fingers were at his wrist. She said his pulse was present and irregular. She said his airway was clear. She said his color was consistent with a vasovagal event, but she needed the medication name before she could confirm that. A gate agent arrived, running at 40 seconds, and stopped 3 feet away, and Arya said to her that they needed the automated external defibrillator from the station at gate 32. She had passed it coming in, and that airport medical should be en route, and that in the meantime, she needed the agent to push everyone back another 6 feet, because the man needed air, and he did not need 18 people's shoes in his peripheral vision when he came around. The gate agent did all of this. Arya stayed with him. She had found the medication bottle, lisinopril, and cross-referenced it against what she had seen, and she said to the companion, steadily and without elevation of voice, that she believed he had experienced a drop in blood pressure, that it was manageable, that he was going to be embarrassed, and that embarrassed was a very good outcome. At 4 minutes and 12 seconds from the moment of collapse, airport medical arrived with a gurney. Arya gave them the pulse rate she had tracked, the medication name, the timeline of loss of consciousness, the fact that his color had begun to normalize at 3 minutes, the position she had maintained him in, and why. She stood up when they took over. She was 2 steps back, before anyone thought to ask her name. Gordon Pell was standing 7 feet away, with his rolling carry-on and his quarter-zip fleece, and he had been standing there for approximately 3 minutes and 40 seconds, which meant he had arrived early enough to have watched most of it. Darius Mercer had arrived at the edge of the gathered crowd and stopped there, and he did not move forward because nothing he could have added would have improved what he was watching. Arya zipped the duffel's outer pocket and stood up and put the strap back on her shoulder. The companion was crying with a specific quality of relief that compresses 11 hours of fear into 40 seconds of release. Arya put one hand briefly on the woman's arm, said that he was in good hands and that she should go with him, and that was all she said. She picked up the duffel. She turned toward the baggage claim. Gordon Pell was still in her path. He was standing in the particular stillness of someone who has just revised a significant assumption and is still processing what that revision costs him. He said, with no qualification and no preamble, that he owed her an apology. He said that on the plane he had been rude and that there was no version of that which was acceptable, and that he was sorry. He said it without the softening additions that people append to apologies when they want the apology to be partial, the ones that begin with but or that contain the word if. Arya looked at him for a moment, the same recalibrating look she had given Darius on the plane. She did not say it was fine. She said she accepted it. Then she walked around him toward baggage claim. The man from the airport floor was named Herbert Gould, 67, retired schoolteacher from outside Madison. He had been discharged from Hartfield Medical Annex by the following morning, the event confirmed as a vasovagal syncope, uncomplicated, manageable, with adjusted medication and hydration guidance. His companion and wife of 39 years, a woman named Rosalind, had given Arya's description to the airport medical team, who had given it to the airport's operations manager, who had submitted a formal commendation request to the General Aviation Authority office. The commendation process took 11 weeks, because processes take 11 weeks. Arya received a letter at her studio apartment in Chicago, on a Thursday, from the Director of Emergency Response Coordination for Hartfield International, informing her that she had been formally recognized for a civilian emergency response under Section 14 of the Airport Authority's Public Safety Code, and that her actions had been logged in the airport's incident record. It was a form letter with her name filled in, but the name was spelled correctly, and the incident report number was real, and real was sufficient. Darius Mercer had called her 8 days after the flight, which was within a reasonable window, and not before it, and she had answered, and they had met for coffee at a place near Brannock Reserve that had good light and unremarkable furniture, and was open late. They had talked for 2 hours. At the end of it, he said he would like to see her again, and she said she thought that was probably true for both of them. The second time they met, he asked about the bracelet, because by then, there had been enough time established between them for the question to be honest rather than presumptuous, and she told him about Marcus, and about August, and about 11 hours in a tent, and Darius listened without redirecting it and without performing sympathy, and at the end of it, he said that he thought Marcus would have been glad that she had kept his bracelet, and not just because of what that said about her. The studio apartment acquired a second chair in the spring of the following year. There had been discussion, quiet and practical, about something more permanent. A conversation conducted in the particular language of people who have both previously treated permanence as a liability and are jointly in the process of changing their minds. At Hartfield's Medical Annex, a consulting room used by the airport's Emergency Response Training Unit was formally renamed in the first week of April. The request had come from Darius, through the Reserve Medical Command, citing the incident of the previous autumn. The room was named the Renaud Consultation Room, and the nameplate beside the door was standard-issue brushed aluminum with black lettering, and it said nothing about the circumstances of the naming or about the man it was named for, because the people who needed to know already did, and the people who did not need to know would learn eventually, if they thought to ask. 3 months after the naming, a trainee paramedic who was new to the airport rotation and had heard a version of the story from a senior instructor, asked one of the gate agents whether it was true that a woman with a bag had saved a man's life in the concourse the previous fall. The gate agent, whose name was Colette, and who had been on shift that day, said that it was true and that the bag had not been in the aisle. The trainee asked if the woman had known what she was doing, and Colette said she had never in 20 years of working that concourse seen anyone move with that kind of certainty and that kind of quiet. Arya, when Darius told her what had been asked, said she had done her job. She said it the same way she had said everything, without elaboration, without reaching for more words than the fact required. She had done her job. That was the whole of it. And it turned out the whole of it was enough. If this story reminded you of someone who carried more than anyone knew, drop "still standing" in the comments. There are more people like Arya in this world than most rooms deserve, and this channel is here to tell their stories. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one. We are not going anywhere. The studio apartment in the Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago sat on the 4th floor of a building that had been constructed in 1951 and had settled into its bones with the particular dignity of structures that have decided to endure rather than impress. The windows faced east, which meant the light came in early and left by 2 in the afternoon, and the furniture, once the second chair arrived, had the quality of a place where someone had made a series of small, deliberate choices rather than one large performative one. Arya had hung nothing on the walls for the first 7 months. The first thing she hung was not a photograph. It was a small shadow box, 4 inches by 6, with a plain black frame, and inside it, mounted on gray fabric, was the laminated card from the interior pocket of the duffel, the one with Marcus Renault's name and blood type, and the date in August. She hung it at eye level beside the kitchen window, where the early light caught it before anything else in the room. Darius had been there when she hung it, and he had held the box level while she marked the wall, and neither of them had said anything about it, which was the correct way to handle it. The nonprofit that employed her on contract, the Valor Bridge Veteran Medical Support Initiative, had offered her a permanent staff position in March, 9 months after the flight from Fort Hensley. The offer came with a title, a modest salary increase, and an office that was actually a shared desk in a building near the river that smelled pleasantly of old carpeting and strong coffee. The director who made the offer was a woman named Therese Okafor, 58, who had a master's degree in public health and a habit of looking at people slightly longer than the social convention required, as if she were finishing a calculation. Therese had heard about the Hartfield incident from a board member who had heard about it from someone at the Reserve Command, which was how institutional knowledge travels, through hallways and phone calls, and the specific friction of people who know people. She had not mentioned it in the offer meeting. She had offered the position based on the contract work, on Arya's completion rate, on the fact that 3 veteran patients had independently requested her by name for follow-up support, which was not a metric that appeared on any formal evaluation rubric, but which Therese had written in the margin of her notes and circled once. Arya had asked for 48 hours to consider the offer. She had used 36 of them, including a conversation with Darius that lasted until the building's heating system shut off for the night, and she had accepted on a Wednesday morning by sending a single-sentence email that confirmed her start date and thanked Therese for the opportunity, without elaborating on the gratitude. She started the following Monday and was on her first patient visit by Tuesday, which Therese would later describe to a colleague as the fastest orientation process she had ever witnessed, delivered without emphasis, as a statement of operational fact. The commendation letter from Hartfield had arrived 11 weeks after the incident, as noted, but there had been a second letter that arrived 4 weeks before it, and this one was not from an airport authority. It was from Rosalind Gould, Herbert's wife, written by hand, on pale blue stationery, in the particular handwriting of someone who was taught penmanship in a classroom where it was considered a form of character. The letter was 2 pages. Rosalind described the sound Herbert had made when he fell, and the feeling of being in a concourse full of people and understanding, in a precise and terrible way, that helpful intention and medical competence are not the same thing, and that for approximately 15 seconds she had possessed only the first. She described watching Arya arrive at her husband's side the way you might describe watching a lock finally meet the right key. Not dramatic, not loud, simply the specific relief of a mechanism working as it was designed to work. She said she had prayed for 38 years, and that she was not going to assign to prayer what belonged to training and presence of mind, because Herbert had told her always to give credit where it was earned, and he would be irritated with her if she started reassigning it now that he was well enough to be irritated. She thanked Arya. She said that she understood that gratitude is sometimes a burden to people who consider themselves to have been simply doing what the situation required, and that she wanted Arya to know she was not asking for anything in return, only to say that Herbert was home, that he had adjusted his medication, that he had gone back to the woodworking project he had abandoned in the garage the previous autumn, and that in the evenings he sat in the kitchen and drank his tea and was, as of the date of the letter's writing, entirely and completely there. Arya read the letter twice. She folded it and put it in the duffel's interior zip pocket, behind the laminated card. It stayed there for 6 days before she moved it to the shadow box, lifting the backing carefully and sliding it flat beneath the mounted card so that both things were in the same place. Gordon Pell had not been part of any of the subsequent events in any formal sense. He had walked toward baggage claim and retrieved his luggage and presumably gone back to the city of Crestview and its commercial real estate operations and the ordinary continuation of his life. There are people who become part of a story's structure and people who pass through it, and he had passed through, leaving behind an apology that had been accepted and required nothing further. What he left structurally was the silence in that cabin, the particular silence of a row of people who had done the arithmetic of intervention and decided the calculation did not favor them, and the way that silence had landed on Arya with the specific weight of the familiar. She had told Darius, in the conversation that lasted until the heating shut off, that the silence had not surprised her, that she had been in enough rooms where the arithmetic came out the same way to have stopped being surprised, but that surprised and affected were not the same thing, and that she had always known the difference. Darius had said he understood. He said the hardest rooms were not the ones where people were cruel, but the ones where people were simply unavailable, where they had looked at the cost of standing up and decided it exceeded their budget, and left you to carry the remainder alone. She had looked at him then, the same recalibrating look, and she had said that was exactly it. He had been in enough of those rooms himself. They had sat with that for a moment, two people who had both spent long portions of their lives carrying remainders, and then the heating had shut off, and the room had gotten slightly cooler, and they had both noticed it at the same time, and moved on to other things. Celestine Renaud called in August, as she always did, and this time, Arya told her about the bracelet's appearance in the Hartfield concourse story, which she had not mentioned in previous calls, not because she was concealing it, but because she had needed a year to find the right way to describe a moment that did not belong to her alone. Celestine listened without interrupting, which was her way, and when Arya finished, she said that Marcus would have found the whole situation entirely characteristic of him, which was to say that his name and his blood type had continued to end up in places where they were quietly necessary without anyone planning for it. She said this in the tone of someone reporting a pattern rather than a sentiment. Arya said she thought that was right. Celestine asked how Chicago was, and Arya said she thought it was becoming home, which was the most she had said about it to anyone, and Celestine said that was good, and she meant it, and it was good. The call lasted 22 minutes. Arya sat afterward in the second chair by the east window in the early August light and looked at the shadow box and kept both hands in her lap and did not reach for the bracelet, which was progress of a kind, small and private and sufficient. The Renaud consultation room at the Hartfield Medical Annex held its first formal training session in the second week of May, 14 months after the incident in the concourse. Darius had arranged it through the reserve command, and Arya had not been asked to attend and had not attended. She learned about it from Darius afterward, that there had been 12 trainee emergency responders in the room, that the instructor had begun the session by describing the response in the concourse not as a case study, but as a baseline, a floor rather than a ceiling, and that one of the trainees had asked whether the responder had been a doctor, and the instructor had said no. She had been a staff sergeant, and the room had been quiet for a moment, in the way rooms are quiet when a category they were using turns out to be the wrong category. Arya heard this and said that she hoped the session had been useful. Darius said he thought it had been. He said the instructor had told him afterward that the name on the door had been a good choice. Arya said that the name on the door had been the only choice. She did not say it as a correction. She said it the way she said most things, as a statement of the plainest available fact, and it was the truest thing she had said about any of it. She wore the bracelet to the Valor Bridge annual gathering in September, a low-key event held in a rented community space near the river, folding tables and mediocre catering, and 23 veteran patients and their families, and the small staff of the organization, Therese moving through the room with her slightly longer than average assessments and her margin notes in her head. Arya had been there for 40 minutes when a man she had worked with on the contract, a former Marine named Curtis, who had lost most of the hearing in his left ear and compensated by standing at a slight angle when he wanted to listen carefully, came to stand beside her at the windows and asked her, without looking at her directly, whether it was true she had dropped a man's blood pressure timeline into an airport medical handoff like it was a regular Tuesday. She said it had been a Tuesday. Curtis looked out the window. He said he had heard she had also once worked 11 hours straight in Kandahar on 12 casualties, and that one of them had asked her if she was tired. She said she had been tired. Curtis nodded. He turned back to the room, to the folding tables and the families and the mediocre catering, and he said that he thought the people who asked whether you were tired, when they were the ones bleeding, were the people you carried in your pocket forever. Arya looked at him. She said that was about right. She touched the bracelet, once, briefly, the two-finger contact at the wrist, and then she went to get a cup of the mediocre coffee, because it was September, and it was cold near the windows, and warmth was warmth. Darius found her 20 minutes later by the coffee table, and they stood together in the comfortable configuration of people who have learned each other's habits of proximity, close enough to talk quietly, and far enough apart to be two separate people, which was how they both preferred it. Outside the east-facing windows of the community space, the river moved south in the late afternoon light, flat and dark and entirely itself, going where it was always going, without announcement.